So Motorola has just released its 10th generation of Moto G smartphones, and these are mobiles which back in the day pretty much single-handedly shook up the entire budget mobile realm and proved that you could get a handset that wasn't hot garbage for just a fraction of the price of your iPhones, your Samsung Galaxies and whatnot. So yeah, for 10 long years now I've been unboxing and reviewing these Moto G handsets. Not quite 10 years actually, not a full decade, because the first Moto G handset came out in 2013, back when I was an editor in Mobile Choice magazine and still had a bit of f***ing hair. Look, there I am with my smooth skin and my not quite so pickled liver, full of spunk and vinegar and probably more spunk. What a tosser. Anyway, because I had so much fun covering them all the first time around, Motorola has very kindly shipped me a box which contains every single generation of Moto G handset ever released. And it's at times like this that I definitely wish that I lifted, bro. But we'll be able to take a little stroll down memory lane together, although after all the lockdown scotch have been put away for the last 16 months or so, the memory lane's kind of more of a dark, hazy, sinister alleyway. So come along then, kiddies, take my hand in a strictly platonic fashion, and let's dodge back through time to when things were slightly less crap, and commemorate a truly game-changing series of smartphones. And for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do poke subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! Okay, here we go. Oh, it opens this way, not that way, bugger. Here we go. Oh, Jesus. Actually, I had to unfurl it on the floor because there are so many phones, unsurprisingly. And here we have it, 10 generations of Moto G goodness, all ready for unboxing. And Motorola also very kindly sent me a whole bunch of multicolored socks as well, so my feet are going to be looking super jazzy. So let's start it all naturally with the one that kick-started the Moto G series, the very first handset. Cast your mind back now, if you can, to 2013. It was a bloody good year for smartphones. Had the likes of the HTC One, the LG G2, the Samsung Galaxy S4. All fantastic Android smartphones, but they all had one thing in common other than the Android OS, and that was the fact that they were bloody expensive. And 2013 was also the year where Google's Nexus 5 was launched as well, a bloody amazing handset and some premium specs as well considering the price point, but the price was still 300 quid. And most smartphones that came in at under that sort of cost were, to put it politely, a little bit poo. But then came along the Moto G for just 135 quid, shockingly priced. I still clearly remember being bowled over by just how good it was, and god, how dinky is this thing as well. It's just 4.5 inches, so very comfortably fits in the hand, despite the fact that you've got absolutely enormous bezels surrounding that display. And of course, another great feature of the Moto G, besides the compact form factor, is the fact that this back end actually came right off. As you can see there, you just get your fingernails stuck in. And as you can see there, this does give you access to the battery, although as it says there, battery not user removable. You're only supposed to allow a proper maintenance guy to do that. But it's also how you slip the SIM card inside, just this handy little slot there. And you could actually swap out the back end as well. You could get this in a number of different colors. So sadly, this is just the black one, but you could swap it for red, orange, yellow, I believe, all kinds of nice, vibrant, vivid hues. Of course, the original Moto G was charged via micro USB, like pretty much all smartphones of that time. So I'm kind of hoping it's already got some gas in the tank, so I don't have to fiddle around and try and dig out one of those old relics. Good bit of headphone jack action up top, but you will notice no fingerprint sensor at all here on the Moto G. It's just good old standard pin entry. Let's see, hopefully, yes, we've got a bit of power on the go there. So Motorola, a Google company, of course, as it was back in the day. Now this is bringing back all of the nostalgia. I still get over how compact this thing is, how dinky that screen is. And a classic, a bit of Motorola intro screen action. Of course, Motorola's always excelled at the old intro screens. And we are in, ladies and gentlemen, the original Moto G from 2013. And of course, one of the reasons it seems so girthy is because it's a 16:9 aspect ratio screen, which of course was all the rage back in the day before everything became 18:9. Now you can even get 21:9 on the likes of Sony's Xperias and even some Motorola's. And that 4.5-inch display is actually a 720p panel, which was one of the reasons I was so blown away by this thing back in the day. It was actually sharper than the iPhone screens from that time period. And still holding up rather nicely, actually, to be fair. For an IPS panel from 2013, the viewing angles aren't exactly shocking. Reasonably punchy colours. And because I cheated and looked it up beforehand, it did ship with Android 4.3 at launch, where you've got to actually reach up to the top to drag down the notifications bar. But it was upgradable to Android 5. Let's just see what we've actually got on here. And there you have it. It's actually running Android version 4.4, got a bit of Android KitKat. So yeah, very different obviously to the Android we know and love these days. The apps tray you'd have to scroll to the sides to get to it. Then you'd have your widgets in there as well. Obviously, good old navigation bar down below. Quite simple and basic overall, really. It's almost like having an iPhone from 2021. And of course, one of the great things about Motorola smartphones are just as they are today, quite a vanilla form of Android, no clunky launcher slathered on top. So you tend to get pretty nippy performance, even though they didn't exactly blow you away with incredible specs as far as the chipsets are concerned. It's just the Snapdragon 400 chipset packed in here. Although you've also got a full gig of RAM, which was basically unheard of at the time around this sort of price point. A classic bit of Chrome. Even the the Google search results seem to be from back in the day as well, because Chris Eubank is one of the first things that pops up when you start searching for Chris. I'll tell you what, when I first reviewed the Motorola Moto G, I never thought one day in the distant future I'd actually be watching one of my own stupid videos on the thing. And I actually forgotten just how good the speakers are on this thing. Tested and published a video on all of the phones mentioned in this roundup, so go check those out for more on each individual handset. But I remember it wasn't all non-stop love with the original Moto G1. So for instance, the standard version did not come with 4G LTE support. You actually had to upgrade to a special 4G version of it, which came on a few months later, I believe it was. And also around back, you've got a basic 5 megapixel rear camera, which I seem to recall was rather poo. Very simple interface though. Basically, it's just a case of tap to shoot, nice and easy. Swipe this way in order to access the settings, just a handful of things like the HDR mode, the flash, a good bit of video action of course, and then swipe this way to access your gallery. What a corker. And you do also have a basic selfie cam shoved away just above the screen as well. This was in the day before notches and selfie orifices and all of that. I do believe it's just a very basic like VGA style selfie cam though. They did not put much effort into these things back in the day. Good to see I'm getting just as good selfies from a 2013 smartphone as I do from 2021 efforts. So anyway, a year later along came the well anticipated sequel, the Moto G2, or I believe at the time it was called the Moto G second generation, just to be super wanky. Clearly Motorola / Google taking a leaf out of Apple's book. The Moto G2 wasn't a massive evolution over that original handset. It just kind of refines it in a couple of key areas. And one of the other big whoops was the fact that it expanded that display size from 4.5 inches to a mighty 5-incher. Apart from that, a quite similar design, once again with the removable back end, you got the headphone jack, all that good stuff. Another funky intro screen, of course, which is basically, I think, the same one as found on the original Moto G. So as you can see there, quite the size difference compared with the original Moto G. Pleasingly compact compared with a glimpse of the future, shall we say. You've now got a good bit of Android lollipop action on board, complete with Google's material design, as they put it. So not a massive evolutionary upscale or anything. A few cool new features on there, but certainly looking pretty basic in many ways compared with the Android that we'd all come to eventually know and love. Once again, 4G wasn't a given. The LTE version of this came later on. Most of the specs sort of remain kind of the same. You do have a stereo speaker output now, but one of the big improvements here was the 8 megapixel camera that you have slapped around back. Again, the same interface and everything, but I seem to recall that it definitely did not struggle as much in sort of more tricky conditions compared with the original one. Photos were generally a lot less grainy and hazy and crap. And there you have a stunning example of the kind of photography you could take in 2014 with the Moto G2. And so next along in line, of course, naturally was the Moto G3, or the Moto G third generation, as I'm pretty sure they insisted on calling it, just to make us online journalists' lives misery as far as SEO is concerned. And while the original Moto G was 135 quid, this one came in at 159 for the base model, so definitely creeping up in price. And the Moto G3 was once again a 5-inch smartphone, just like the Moto G2, with a 720p 16:9 display, although 4G finally came as standard. And a few little refinements in design over the Moto G2, so for instance those stereo speaker grills aren't quite so huge and obvious, and around back you've still got these sort of soft touch finish, but you've actually got a bit of texture in there now as well, just to help it with grip. And again, that back panel just prizes on off as well, so you can actually swap it for a different color / design. And the Moto G3 was actually the first Motorola smartphone that came with the Moto Maker service online. So when you ordered your snazzy new Moto G third generation, you could actually choose which color came bundled with it. I think you could order extra covers. You could even have it embossed, I believe, with like your name or a rude slogan. Got space there, as you can see there, for your SIM card and your micro SD memory cards as well to expand that storage. And despite the fact you've got this removable back and various ports, including good old headphone jack, still, the Moto G3 was actually IPX7 water resistant. You know, future Moto Gs are generally splash proof, but this one could get fully on dunked, could get proper moist and shrug it off. And the Moto G3 was powered by the slightly aged at the time Snapdragon 410 chipset, but the fact that you've got a nice stock vanilla version of Android Lollipop on there, upgradable to Marshmallow soon after the launch of the Moto G3, means that again everything just runs nice and smoothly. And of course you do have that Moto Assistant on board, which, oh my god, it just looks so quaint these days. Got the notifications on the lock screen, the do not disturb, all of that good stuff. And most notably, of course, if you dive into the action section, you do have that double karate chop for touch, one of my all-time favorite Motorola features. I can't actually remember it appearing this early on in the Moto G series range. Moto G3 touch, activate! Wow! And one of the other best bits of the Moto G3 was the fact that you got the same incredible 13 megapixel rear camera as found on the premium priced Nexus 6 smartphone. It's one of the benefits, of course, of Motorola coming under the Google Fold. Again, very much the same camera interface as before, nice and simple and easy to get to grips with. Yep, sexy times all round. So next up was the Moto G4, and it actually was called the Moto G4 as well, none of this 4th generation bollocks. And this was actually the first Moto G series smartphone to come accompanied by a sibling model, the Moto G4 Plus, although both of them were 5.5 inch beasts. Yep, that's right, 5.5 inches. Things were starting to get serious now. I did actually note in my review of the Moto G4 for Recombu that it was a little bit tricky to use one-handed. Oh, if only I'd known. And as you might have spied in that little startup sequence as well, it is now a Lenovo company. So Google sold Motorola to Lenovo back in the day, just before the launch of the Moto G4. You've got a good bit of Android Marshmallow on there. As you can see, you've actually got scrolling apps tray now, for instance, but apart from that, looks very much like your typical traditional vanilla Android interface. That RSN can still be ripped free to access like the micro SD memory card slot and the SIM card slot as well, but there's no fingerprint sensor here on the Moto G4. That little feature was reserved for the Moto G4 Plus. So as you can see there, quite the size difference between the already fairly hefty Moto G3 and the absolute behemoth Moto G4. But that size boost was at least matched with a full HD resolution screen, so everything stayed nice and crisp whether you are watching videos, checking out your photos, whatever you're up to. The Moto G4 was powered by the Snapdragon 617 chipset, so everything stayed nice and nippy, helped along again by the vanilla Android action. And around back you once again had another brilliant 13 megapixel rear camera, this time with a fresh new interface that gave you access to some of those settings right there on the main display. For access to the rest, you could still drag out to the side. As you can see there, you got quite a bit you can play around with. You can shoot up to full HD resolution footage at 30 frames per second. And for the Moto G4, you also had an upgraded 5 megapixel selfie shooter as well, which could do a great job for your Instas. Well, at least it probably would do if you didn't go too heavy on the unhinged convict look. Alright, so moving along to the Moto G5, aka got sexy, because we've got a completely fresh redesign for the Moto G series for the first time really since the original. Motorola actually ditched the plastic look entirely and went for a good bit of polished metal instead. Nice two-tone finish, as you can see there. The lovely bit of circular camera chassis action too. I mean, frankly, woof. And yeah, this was 2017, so metal phones had been around for a little while, from like the HTCs and all of that, but Motorola was jumping on it just, unfortunately, as the bandwagon was about to go crashing off a cliff. So certainly quite the difference in design. You might think because you've got that metal backend on the Moto G5 that you can't actually remove the back end anymore, but you'd be wrong. Got a handy little notch down here, just get your fingernail into that, and with a bit of effort, a bit more muscle than what I've got on my puny little man drumsticks. The little bugger eventually pops right off to reveal a fully removable battery and of course the usual SIM and micro SD guffins. And to go hand in hand with that fresh new physical design, you've also got a updated boot up screen as well. Hip hip huzzah.
Hello, Moto.
all of the acid. And lots of other changes versus the older Moto G4 as well. One of the most notable being the fact that the size has shrunk back down there. You're not going insane. It is a 5-incher compared with a 5.5-inch Moto G4, so a bit easier to handle. The front is protected by a good bit of Gorilla Glass 3, and you do actually have the very first fingerprint sensor on a standard Moto G model as well. Got to admit, I don't miss these front-facing fingerprint sensors because it did unfortunately mean you had absolutely enormous bezels down below, which really did increase the size of the smartphone somewhat, although they were still somewhat preferable to those in-display ones. They were certainly a lot more responsive. I do remember being quite relieved that I didn't have to enter a pin or a pattern every single time I wanted to unlock this Moto G handset. Just tap your fingerprint, off you go. Besides all that though, very similar specs to the Moto G4. So once again got a Snapdragon 430 power and proceedings. Android, as you can see there, has upgraded, so now you no longer have to tap the annoying little icon to drag up the apps tray. Still no swiping navigation shenanigans though, so you do still have, unfortunately, the navigation bar down below, but you do have the Google Discover page in its early incarnation. And you also once again have a 13 megapixel rear camera and then a 5 megapixel camera up front. Of course, by this point in time, things were getting very hot down in the budget phone realm. Motorola was no longer the only player who did handsets worth considering. You got the likes of Honor was making great strides down there, Nokia with its awesome affordable Lumia smartphones, and the likes of Wiley Fox from the UK as well. So definitely a great time for consumers who didn't have all this bloody cash stuffed down their shorts in order to afford the latest Samsungs or Apples. So we'd already gone through one pretty major Moto G series design change, and then along came the Moto G6. And as you can see here, once again, completely different aesthetics here. So metal was basically already fallen out of fashion. Yuck, disgusting Moto G5. I puke on you, you silver punk of arse residue. So now what we have with the Moto G6 is a good bit of glass action on the back as well as the front, bit of Gorilla Glass 3 all over to be precise. And to be fair, the Moto G6 still looks rather nifty. I still like that S-bend sort of curvature to the light when it strikes that back end. And you can certainly see from the front as well, the Moto G6 just looks that much more refined compared with the boxy, huge bezel action here on the Moto G5. Certainly a lot more reminiscent of what we would eventually come to know as modern smartphones. And oh yeah, you've still got the very funky intro, of course. Of course, you had a much skinnier fingerprint sensor down beneath the screen than before, but Motorola also decided to cram its logo in there just above it, so you've still got a pretty chunky bezel down beneath. Proper bit of Jimmy Hill action there. And the Moto G6 rocks a nice clean vanilla version of Android 8, which is otherwise known as Android Oreo, and you're starting to see something that's much more reminiscent of what we know and love as the modern Android experience now. Looks a lot more visual. You've got some real style creeping in the various menus and everything. If you dive into the settings, you'll see that's changed up quite a bit. And I even quite like the hazy, sexy wallpaper on the back as well. And the Moto G6 isn't just the first all-glass Motorola G smartphone as well. It's also the first 18:9 effort as well. So you've got a much more slender, less girthy finish. Got a 3,200 milliamp battery that could easily keep you going all day. In fact, I tended to get generally 2, sometimes even 2.5 days out of this thing. It was absolutely incredible. Good bit of Snapdragon 450 action. And you may have noticed around back, you've actually got 2 lenses instead of the standard one as well. There's no ultra-wide angle action or anything like that, though. It's your 12 megapixel primary sensor backed by a 5 megapixel depth sensor for your portrait shots. And you're starting to get a few of those trusty Motorola bonus camera modes creeping through, including the likes of the spot color, of course. Good bit of face filter action. So you could do stuff like this if you're a bit of a fucking idiot. And of course, it is the largest display of any of the Moto G series handsets so far, with a 5.7-inch IPS panel on board, though it didn't feel quite so bad because at least the bezels to the sides were much skinnier than before. Now, on top of the 18:9 stretched aspect ratio made for a really pleasing hand feel. Oh yeah. Now we're approaching the end of our lovely little Motorola G journey. Next up, of course, came the Moto G7, which was the most expensive of the Moto G standard handsets so far, costing 239 quid. And from this point, I was actually covering the Moto G handsets right here on TechSpert, but you can see some of my reviews of the earlier models right on the Recombu channel if you're interested to learn more about those, or if you want to see me in action when I was even more painfully awkward and stuttery on camera. The Moto G7, of course, was the first to introduce a notch, so that screen was pretty much stretching edge to edge. We still had a good bit of Motorola branding down below naturally. And of course you had that rear mounted fingerprint sensor now, which was much more convenient. You had faster charging, a good bit of OIS built into the camera, which once again was a dual lens system. The G8, of course, was a very sexy Morpho indeed. Some very nice specs again for a good price. And just check out this burgundy red version. Yum. That is an absolute stunner, no doubt. Even now in 2021, I would quite happily rock that everywhere I went. Comes packing upgraded camera tech. You've now actually got a quad lens system, which of course is all the rage in budget smartphones in 2021. Once again, got a good bit of notch. You got a 5,000 milliamp battery. And then last up, before we get into the fresh new Moto G series handsets, you got the Moto G9 from last year. So as you can see there, sports a 64 megapixel primary camera, though not quite as sexy a finish as that Moto G8. Of course, from the Moto G7 series, you had all kinds of pluses, plays, powers, all kinds of variant models, just to make things a little bit more confusing. Now in the fresh 10th generation, Moto has completely changed up the naming conventions. Now you've got the likes of the Moto G30, the Moto G50, the Moto G100. You can check out my unboxings of all of those smartphones right here on TechSpert. I will hopefully be continuing to cover Motorola handsets for quite some time because I'm getting the feeling there's going to be a lot more still to come. Who knows, I might even do a 20-year unboxing if I'm actually still alive at that point. If any of us are still alive at that point, who knows what's going to happen, because if the last 16 months or so have taught me anything, it's basically don't plan ahead. So anyway, that right there is my retrospective of the Moto G series, and I can't believe I've reviewed every single bloody one of these things throughout time. And of course, as I say, a real game changer, and it's basically molded the budget smartphone realm into what we know and love these days. So much competition from newcomers to the UK, likes of Xiaomi and Oppo and Realme, who are all, providing some really strong handsets down there in the sort of £200–300 price bracket, making you wonder, why would you spunk $1,000 on a fresh new handset? So anyway, it would be great to hear your own Motorola memories down in the comments below. If you've rocked a Moto smartphone from some point in history, if you've had any of these slapped in your handbag, stashed in your shorts, whatever, it'd be great to hear your own thoughts. Please do poke, subscribe and ding that notifications bell for more on the latest and greatest tech, and have yourselves a lovely bloody week. Cheers everyone, love you.